continuing with the subject of anger, is there justified anger? So generally the Rambam advocates the golden mean as the ideal ethic. However, with regard to anger, the Rambam does not abide any middle road and advises that one should distance himself from it until the furthest extremity, and that's in Hilchot Dayot. Even in cases where anger can be rationalized, one should avoid it and train himself to become indifferent, to avoid provocation by insults or wrongdoing. As alluded earlier, anger is forbidden even when it is intended to spur someone to do a mitzvah or to prevent someone from sinning. The Midrash, Vayikra Rabbah Shmini, counts 3 instances in which Moshe became angry and as a result forgot the law. In one incident, Moshe was enraged when some Israelites collected too much manna, violating Hashem's explicit directive. And as a result, Moshe forgot to relay Hashem's command to collect a double portion of man on Fridays. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz writes, his wisdom departed from him not as a punishment for the sin of anger, but rather as a natural occurrence. In that anger consumes a person's wisdom, and it matters not that the anger is justified. And it says Moshe's fury was justified, yet wisdom and anger cannot coexist regardless of the cause of the anger.
Rabbi Yochanan, who explains that the slaughter is deemed a fit slaughter because Shimon refers to where the thief slaughtered an unblemished offering inside the temple courtyard, does then the slaughter render the animal permitted for consumption, while the subsequent throwing of the blood on the altar renders the animal permitted for consumption. And according to Reish Lakish, who explains that the slaughter is deemed a fit slaughter because Rabbi Shimon refers to where he slaughtered a blemished offering outside the temple courtyard. Then does the slaughter render the animal permitted for consumption, while the subsequent redemption of the blemished animal renders the animal permitted for consumption. So guys, in both cases, there was a slight issue, because we noticed in the first case, the reason why the thief owes the full fivefold penalty is, although he did it on the owner's behalf, the slaughter, up until the time where he wasted the blood and didn't throw it on the altar, is deemed a legitimate slaughter, but he failed to follow through. And because he failed to follow through, that's why he owes a full or fivefold penalty on the slaughtering of the animal. Okay? But at the end of the day, there wasn't an actual fit slaughter because the blood wasn't thrown on the altar. In the second case, the animal permitted for consumption is being redeemed even before it's technically been redeemed. So the same question comes up, is that in Rav Yochanan's case, since at the time of the slaughter the blood stands to be thrown on the altar, the meat is considered fit for consumption immediately upon the slaughter, and it's deemed a fit slaughter. But the bottom line is it wasn't done. Now, that's the question that Rav Elazar says. Now, it says the Gemara rejects Rav Elazar's question because it slipped the mind of Rav Elazar with following opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Now, by the way, guys, it obviously never slipped the mind of Rav Elazar. The Gemara puts it in this way just to teach us a rule of Rabbi Shimon. And that is 2 rules. Any blood that stands to be thrown on the altar is considered as if it was already thrown. Okay? So that's the first rule. The second rule is, and anything that stands to be redeemed is considered as if it was already redeemed. Okay, so that being the case, where do we learn it from? There's a brisa that Rabbi Shimon says. It's a brisa that he's involved with. There is nosar that contracts food tuma. So nosar is sacrificial meat that was left over and was not consumed within the allotted time for its consumption. Now, if with nosar meat, you have it after that time, that's known as pigul. And pigul gets kares. So it's a big problem, and it was brought in the death penalty cases. I'm assuming if there were witnesses, etc., there would be a death penalty on it. But nosar is not the act of eating after the sacrificial meat after the prescribed time. That actual verb is called pigul, but nosar is the sacrificial meat itself that was left over and not consumed within the allotted time. So it must be burnt, that meat. What's the source of it? And you can't consume it at all for benefit. It's in Shmot, Exodus chapter 12, verse 10, and then chapter 29, verse 34, and then Leviticus, Vayikra, chapter 7, verse 17. Okay, those are the sources for it. So we're learning that there is nosa that contracts food tumah, and there's nosa that does not contract food tumah. So if you look at in Leviticus chapter 11, verse 34 in Vayikra, talks about food that was inside a tameh earthenware utensil. So that any food that is edible shall become tameh. It's susceptible to becoming impure. So the general consensus is that the verse meant to say that although it's halachically forbidden for consumption, it still can contract food tumah in certain cases by coming into a source of tumah. So Rabbi Shimon expounds the verse to read that only food that may be eaten, at least by others, even if it can't be eaten by Jews, is susceptible to food tumah. But if food is forbidden for benefit, that you can't even feed it to a non-Jew, nor give it to your dogs, etc., that's not susceptible to food tumah, because it's rendered pretty useless by the fact that you can't benefit from it. So in this brisa, Rabbi Shimon modifies the ruling to teach that it applies only to food that was never permitted for benefit. So food that you could, guys, at any time use for benefit, even if it was just once, is susceptible to food tumah, even if later it becomes prohibited for benefit. So he states there's nosa which is also presently prohibited for benefit, is susceptible food tumah, and there's nosa which is not susceptible to food tumah. So if you have kodashim meat that had any moment of fitness after it was slaughtered, at which point it became susceptible to food tumah, it remains susceptible to food tumah, even after it became nosar, at the stage where you can't eat it. But nosa that it never had a moment of fitness from the time it was slaughtered is not susceptible to food tumah. So in case you're confused, how does this relate to the throwing of the blood? Because at the end of the day, the slaughter was done correctly in the right place. The only thing that rendered it actually not functional was that the blood wasn't thrown on that altar. So it was at that time susceptible to food tumah because everything was going on schedule until it wasn't. Does that make sense? It's not as if the plane didn't take off. It took off and crashed. So it was on its way to its destination. It just didn't happen to arrive at its destination. Kevin, you're falling asleep, which is okay. I don't mind. So that's what we're saying is this brisa answers the question. Any blood that would have been thrown on the altar is considered as if it was thrown, even if it wouldn't. So because it had a moment of fitness where it could have been rendered as a sacrifice, and the minute it could have been rendered as a sacrifice, it's not as if you're dealing with a treifa animal that could never be rendered beneficial, and therefore there's no 4 or 5-fold payment. The reason why the thief owes the 4 or 5-fold payment here is at the time before he decided not to throw the blood on the altar, the shchita was done correctly. Everything was done correctly where it was meant to take place, just that last stage. And since everything was done correctly, that makes it a liability for the 4 or 5-fold payment. Actually, if he'd have done it correctly on behalf of the owner, he wouldn't have to pay anything, because the principle of it was achieved, that he did it for the original owner who wanted to sacrifice it anyway. If he did it for himself and did put it on the altar and did sprinkle on the blood, then he would owe it, because that's the equivalent of slaughtering an animal which he benefited from, not the original owner. So if we go on with this theme of nosar, it says, Rabbi Shimon said, there is nosa that contracts food tumah, and there's nosa that does not contract food tumah. And if it stayed overnight before throwing the blood of the blood on the altar, what that means is, this is just referring to Kodashim, whose allotted time for eating is 1 day and 1 night. You've got the Torah offering in Kodesh Kodashim, and it becomes Nosa when they remain uneaten overnight. And basically, we talk about blood that wasn't thrown on the altar on the day the animal was slaughtered. And therefore, the meat never became permitted. Okay? So basically, in that case, it does not contract food tumah, since the meat never had a moment of fitness for consumption from the time it was slaughtered, because it wasn't thrown within the prescribed time period. If it had stayed overnight after the throwing of the blood on the altar, it does contract food tumah. So that means in the case of the throwing of the blood, it says it's rendered permitted for consumption and susceptible to food tumah. So although you can't presently benefit because it's not so, in other words, you didn't consume it within the allotted time, it still retains its early susceptibility to tumah, because the blood was thrown on the altar in due time. It just wasn't eaten, the food, in due time. Okay? So, and it's established for us that what Rab Shimon means is before the throwing of the blood, in other words, before the blood became fit for throwing, or does he mean after the blood, the throwing of the blood? So the Gemara says no, it actually means became fit for throwing after the blood. So what does that mean? That Rabbi Shimon doesn't differentiate between Kodashim that stayed overnight before or after the blood was actually thrown. So it doesn't matter whether, sorry, there's a disturbance. Arthur's back. Okay, that's good. So yeah, what we're saying is there's no issue of whether or not the blood was thrown. It wasn't consumed in time, which means if it's as if he did throw the blood on the altar, it's as if he did. So the Gemara defines the brisa further. Accordingly, what is the case of if it stayed overnight because it became fit for throwing of the blood, where there was no time left in the day to throw the blood? There, guys, it's when he slaughtered it immediately prior to sunset, and then it doesn't contract food tumah. So what we're saying is, if he slaughters the animal just before sunset, and there's no time in which to throw the blood on the altar, before sunset, it actually becomes disqualified for throwing. Okay, and therefore it will never contract food tumah. Does that make sense? But if there was time before sunset to throw the blood on the altar, it's whether or not it was thrown or not, it's considered as if it was already thrown, and therefore it becomes eligible for nosar food tumah, because even if there was no blood thrown, it still had enough time period to allow it to do so. Are there any questions?
Fine, thanks.
Okay, so Gavin, just Arthur, I'm going to ask you a question. Just relay what the point. No, come on, Arthur. You always get out of it. Everybody else answers it.
I want to try after Arthur. Ask your question.
Oh, I'm asking you what's this point of this nosar and the tumah and the non-tumah and the blood and everything? Explain the concept.
I don't know. I don't understand it at the moment.
Could I
I'm
try?
blank.
What's nosar again? Damon just said again. Sorry, I went.
Okay. So
I want to ask a question. Just say what's nosar, then I want to ask a question. Okay.
It's sacrificial meat that was left over and not consumed within the time allotted for its consumption.
Okay, then it's not. Then it's considered like it's not kosher anymore. It has to be.
Yeah, it has to be burnt. It's forbidden for consumption or for any.
Burnt with the innards and the parts of the
Yeah.
on the mizbeach.
Yeah.
So the bloods you're talking about, the bloods, if the food got contaminated by water or blood, I think, eh?
No.
Did you say that earlier, or
not yet?
Anything that's contaminated, you have to sprinkle if the animal is slaughtered as part of the avodah. they collect the blood and they sprinkle it on the
Correct.
but it also has to be done within a certain time, and then but the animal can't be slaughtered if it's a trefa or if it has a mum.
But how does this all relate together? Can any of you give it over, and then we can go step by step?
Then maybe it's not. If it's found to have a mum or it can't be
I'm agreeing
concentrated
with you.
then.
I'm agreeing with
concentrated
you,
then.
How do all these concepts fit together? I'm agreeing with you completely.
In terms of ownership of this, are you talking about the stolen animal that was stolen originally?
Yeah, how does all these concepts fit together?
In terms of liability and ownership, then maybe if a person didn't do the sprinkling and the eating of the meat within the allotted time, then maybe there's full penalty. There's a certain penalty that's attached to it.
Okay, so Arth, tell me what you know.
At the moment, I don't know anything. I'm just exhausted, but carry on. I'm trying to listen and learn.
Okay, so, all right. So, what the issue is?
I can give you the bottom line, Damon. I think. Can I just try the bottom line?
Yeah.
So I think the bottom line here basically, if the animal, if it attracts truma, what's it, truma? Then there's no penalty. If it doesn't attract a truma, then there is a penalty.
Not at all. Not at all. Okay. Generally, you're right, but you've.
So here's the bottom line, Gavin. There's the bottom line.
Yeah, well, that's better than my bottom line.
No, yours is still better than.
That was the bottom line. I was listening. I know a bit of the.
No, I know, but it's not correct. I can't tell you it's correct if it's not correct. Okay, so
back to front then.
It's inside out, back to front, left to right. Let's start again.
Okay, Damon, you better tell it because you know a bit more than we do, and we try our valiant best, but we're not on your league.
I thought that was the bottom line, and I was kind of listening. Sorry.
I believe you. All right, let's look at the first concept. Arthur, the first concept is the Gemara's asking. It's saying there's something wrong here because we talk about stolen from the house of the man. So the halacha came up that if somebody vouched for the sacrifice and said, listen, the sacrifice goes missing, I'm the insurance policy, I'll bring another sacrifice in its stead. Now, if a thief steals it from Hekdesh, he actually has to pay the twofold payment to the original owner, even though it's in the premises of Hekdesh or it's been consecrated to Hekdesh, because the owner decided to have his own backup insurance with his declaration. So then the twofold, fourfold, or fivefold would kick in. The four or fivefold if he sacrificed it, if he slaughtered it, and the twofold if he just stole it from Hekdesh. Because as Gavin mentioned yesterday, and I concurred with him, it didn't matter if it happened at the home of the homeowner or it happened already at the temple treasury. At the point at which he donated it to the temple treasury, it's known as, it goes from the term chulin to Hekdesh, which means it's been allotted to Shemaim. So at that point, if he provides a guarantee that if that animal disappears, he will replace it with another animal, then the thief would have to pay, even though it technically belongs to Hekdesh, the original owner, a twofold payment for the theft. And if he slaughtered it after he stole it from Hekdesh, it would be a fourfold for a sheep or a fivefold for an ox to the original owner. But if the original owner gave it to Hekdesh without a guarantee, meaning if the animal just disappeared from the temple treasury or died or anything, and he wouldn't have to make good in a replacement, then the thief wouldn't pay a twofold payment for stealing it from Hekdesh to the original owner, nor would he pay a fourfold or fivefold for slaughtering a sheep or an ox. Why? Because the pasuk said he has to steal it from the house of the man. And what does that mean? It's in Shmot, Exodus chapter 22, verse 6. It means it doesn't only mean literally from the house. It means from when it costs the man, he's actually stealing from just Kevin, please let me finish. It means he's stealing it from a private person. Because if a person's going to be his own insurance company to back it up, Kevin, then the thief is actually stealing from him, because at the point where the guy doesn't give a guarantee and gives it to the shul, it's the shul's problem. He's fulfilled the mitzvah. Yeah, what did you want to ask that was so pressing?
Me?
Yeah, you had a question.
Okay, so if the owner consecrates it, dedicates it to Hegdesh, then it's actually not his property effectively. So if it's stolen by the thief, is that also an issue?
Yes, we're saying generally, if you donate something to the shul, Hashem gave you the mitzvah, and then the thief stole it from the shul. It's his problem with Shemaim. It's not the original owner's problem.
The owner's actually the custodian, even though he originally owned it and before he consecrated it.
No, I'm saying the point at which he donated it to the shul or the mizbeach or whatever it is, it's not his problem anymore. He fulfilled the mitzvah. It's the shul's responsibility. If you give 5,000 rand, Hashem will give you the reward to give it to the shul. If somebody stole it out of the shul kitty box, it's between Shemaim, Hashem and the thief. The guy did the mitzvah. It's not his problem. But if he put out a written guarantee and gave, for example, an ox, because we're in an agrarian or agricultural society, and said, listen, if anything happens to this asset, like it got sick and it died, the cow, or somebody stole it, that he would give another donation to the shul. At that point, he's now got personal liability and a vested share into it. So now it actually is the original owner's problem if it got stolen from the shul, because the shul's going to come to him and said, listen, your ox died, it got stolen, or something happened, make good and replace the animal, replace the donation. So if the original owner, whether it's in his property and he allocated it to Hekdesh, but it's still technically in his property or in the property of the shul, either way, if it comes with a guarantee, the thief that steals it, that's once it's already donated to Hekdesh, whichever premises it's on, would have to make a twofold payment to the original owner, or the 4 or 5-fold if the original owner gave the donation with the guarantee of replacement. If he didn't, the thief doesn't have to pay the twofold payment, the 4 or 5-fold. He's got a problem with Shemaim. We haven't found out if he has to just pay the principal back to Hekdesh. Obviously, he'd have to. But there's no penalty, because it says, yes, in order for there to be, he shall pay double, according to that verse, he has to steal from the house of the man, meaning a private person who has a vested financial interest in that item. So that's what we're saying, Gavin. So that's
also the question. Just stop 1 second. What would motivate a person to guarantee something to a temple where he's got no control over what happens to the temple? It doesn't make sense that someone would actually guarantee it. I don't see why they would.
All right, so let's bring a scenario. It's a good question, and then we're building step upon step, Kev. So that's exactly it. So let's not say very often it wouldn't get stolen, because nobody would have that much chutzpah to think they're doing Hashem a favor by consecrating something they stole from a temple. I mean, it's madness. I mean, it takes a psychopath to want to do that. You know what I mean? You murder somebody and you do drug running and prostitution and then give money to the shul and think you're tzaddik. It's not going to happen. But it could be that the animal could die. So in other words, if you're in a society where you're not dealing with money, but you're dealing with products or animals, okay, and that cow was worth 100 zuz, for example, and that was it's a bechor, it's a firstborn. You have to give it to the shul. You have to. And you might say that if it gets sick and it dies, that you still, certain offerings you have to have an obligation with to give a backup guarantee. Some you don't. And some people do anyway, because they still want to get that mitzvah. Okay, so they generally insure it in case the animal gets sick and dies. I would check the animal with a stethoscope first, but before I made such a guarantee. But I'm no farmer. So the thing of it is, very rarely it would be stolen. Most often it would drop dead from disease. So it's like a car where somebody insures your car for theft and accidents. Now, it's more likely you have an accident than a theft. I know I've been trying to have my car stolen for a while now, my Mercedes, and it's not getting stolen. So the thing of it is, you've got third-party liability and all sorts of other things. So often there's a statistical higher probability driving around in the car overseas. Let's not talk about South Africa. Overseas, it's less likely a car gets stolen in Australia than you get into a car accident. So the probability that you're using a comprehensive insurance plan is that you're going to claim on the accidental benefit cover as opposed to the theft cover. In a first world country, more likely. But you still are protected against theft. It's the same thing here. The animal's more likely to drop dead of a disease than it is to be stolen when the people that are looking after the animal. You'd have to be pretty presumptuous and pretty lucky to get away with it. Because then the thief would have to pay back the principal to Hekdesh anyway, which means he doesn't get off the hook. At the worst, he'd still have to pay what he stole. It's not a benefit to him. And he doesn't know when he's stealing it, if there's some sort of guarantor in the animal at which he'd pay a 4 or 5-fold for slaughtering it. So it's too risky for the thief as well. The thief generally doesn't know what he's getting into when he's stealing it if the court catches him. So that's a primary example, is that it's a comprehensive guarantor. Does that make sense? Of where the disease is more likely than theft because of the penalties involved for the thief. Let me tell you something, Gavin. If you were a thief, which you're not, you don't want to incur a 4 or 5-fold penalty. You would be in the business of stealing donkeys, where you only have to pay back double, not a 4 or 5-fold. Because a bachor with a donkey you can sacrifice. Do you remember that? You remember you can, what do you call it? Not sacrifice, consecrate it. So if one is a thief, one would be in a donkey business to take from the temple treasury. Not in the sheep or cow business, because that would cost you 4 or 5-fold. Whereas on a donkey, you only pay double, and you can give the bechor to be consecrated. Do you understand what I'm saying? So that would be the business of the theft. It's less likely in this case. That's why a person would offer a guarantee, because it's more likely that the animal would die of disease. In terms of why he would do it, either he would feel that he has a spiritual obligation to make good on it, or there's an instruction to do so according to what sort of offering it is. Okay. Does that satisfy your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Then there's a second point asked. So now that that question is asked, it's saying, but what are you talking about that is considered the house of the man if it was stolen from Hekdesh, where the person would now owe the owner the 4 or 5-fold because he's prepared to the original owner to put a personal guarantee. Now he's affected that private person. So that's why the thief owes the original owner still, even though it goes to Hekdesh, because the original owner, in this case, made a personal guarantee. If he didn't, there would only be the principal paid back to Hekdesh. But the question goes, is why would you have to pay a 4 or 5-fold penalty when the slaughter is not fit? What do we mean it's not fit? We learned a case that if the consecrated animal is slaughtered outside the temple courtyard, you can't get benefit from it because it's an illegal slaughter in terms of a sacrifice. So therefore, there's no 4 or 5-fold payment on it. That's how the Gemara started this point up. Why would the thief pay it? Because it wasn't slaughtered in the right place. That's how the question arose. Now I'm going to put step upon step. Do you understand what the question is now, Arf? Okay, so then the Gemara is saying, well, tell me what you don't understand, please, mate. I really, really want to help you.
No, what did I say? I'm just so tired. I mean, I've worked since 7 o'clock this morning. My brain's not absorbing nothing at the moment. It's like blank. I promise. Like, I hear you talking, I just don't hear anything. Nothing goes in. It's just, I'm exhausted. Just pure exhaustion.
And it's the heat as well, Damon. That's why also to run out and it's gonna be. It makes you very tiring this time for you. Yeah, it's hot and it's humid now. That's
listen. All right, I get it. It's like my friend says, his wife's mouth moves, but he doesn't understand the words she's saying.
Oh, so
all right. So what's happening, guys? Bottom line is the question arose: what do you mean there's a 4 or 5-fold payment? Because the animal was consecrated and it was slaughtered outside the temple courtyard, which means it's like a treifa animal because it wasn't slaughtered in the right place. You can't get benefit from it. So why would you pay a 4 or 5-fold payment, even if there was no guarantor in his personal capacity for the sacrifice, because it was slaughtered in the wrong place? That's the question that arose, Gav, and they will answer. step by step.
Is it because it's almost like as if it was stolen because they couldn't, because they basically lost it?
No, they lost it because if a thief steals a treifa animal, and a treifa is an animal that's going to die anyway, so you can't. It's not a kosher animal to shecht.
Yeah.
An animal has to be healthy, that it's going to live long enough, not that it almost can die on its own before you go and you blow it over. So then that animal is treif. You can't eat it. So since you can't get benefit, if you steal an animal that's treifa, there's no penalty for slaughtering it because you can't get benefit from the shechita, that slaughter. So if you can't get benefit, then you don't owe 4 or 5-fold payment on the slaughter. It's got to be something that the thief can benefit from by either selling it or slaughtering it. But if you can't get benefit, there's no 4 or 5-fold payment. It's like stealing a car where the engine's out. The court's going to look at the thief as a moron, and he's not going to get such a severe penalty because the car's hardly moving. So it's in that case the question arose. But this sacrifice was consecrated, but slaughtered by the thief outside the temple courtyard. So if the thief was that stupid to render the animal useless, where nobody could get benefit from it and eat it, there's no 4 or 5-fold payment for the thief because he's retarded. You just can't get benefit. So that's the question. It doesn't matter if there's a guarantee on the animal or not. There's the thief isn't eligible for any sort of penalty. That's the question. And then the next question arose is, well, who's going to answer it? So there were 3 answers. Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, and he said in the name of Rav Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon's ruling in our Mishnah refers to where the thief slaughtered an unblemished offering inside the temple courtyard for the sake of the original owner. And then the Gemara answers as we thought, but why would the thief be liable for a 4-fold or 5-fold payment? Because if he's doing this on behalf of the original owner, he has returned the principal to the owner, meaning the owner, all he wanted to do was sacrifice the animal. The thief steals it, has in mind that he's doing it on behalf of the animal, the original owner, and fulfills the owner's wishes, and now has to pay a 4 or 5-fold penalty to the owner. So why would the thief steal it for somebody else's benefit if the owner could have taken it to a temple himself? And if he did do it for the original owner's benefit, he did the owner a favor. He just saved him a trip. So why
that is totally hypothetical. Are you saying the thief slaughtered it for the owner's benefit on behalf of the owner?
Yes.
He consecrated.
No, on behalf of the owner.
Was it because he felt guilty?
No, well, it doesn't make any sense to me, and that's why the Gemara says.
Why would he do such a thing?
Firstly, why would he
stole it to keep it for himself?
And if he did it for the original owner, firstly, how would we know his mindset? Because if the court said, "What was your mindset?" No, it was for the original owner. Well, how do I know what you're thinking? How do I know what your kavanah was, your intention was? That's number one. And number 2, even if we say we're mind readers and we can read your kavanah, why would you owe the 4 or 5-fold payment? Because you're doing it on behalf of the original owner anyway, who wanted to consecrate it to Hekdesh. So all you did is you helped the original owner. Why would you pay a 4-fold penalty? You're not getting any benefit. You're doing it for the owner. So that doesn't make sense. So there was an alternative answer given. And that alternative answer was, Rav Yitzchak Bar Ravin said, we are dealing with where the blood spilt and was never applied on the altar. So that makes more sense. It was a ritual slaughter, so the slaughter was ritual. Right place, right methodology. But it wasn't finalized where it had any benefit where the blood was sprinkled on the altar. And that's what we learned in Soto, is the blood has to go on the altar. So by virtue of the fact that he slaughtered it correctly, Gavin, and he did it in the right place, the thief now becomes eligible for the 4 or 5-fold payment for the legitimate slaughter of the animal in the right place. And the reason why, the reason why he basically has to pay it is, apart from the right place and the right time, is if you want to say he did it on behalf of the original owner, but he actually never went through with it properly. It means he did cost the original owner a valid sacrifice, so he would still have to pay the 4 or 5. Do you get what I'm saying? That was the response to Rav Dimi. It's a case where he might have done it on behalf of the original owner. He just got lazy in it. and then now he owes the money because the original owner didn't get the value for what he thought he'd get because the goal wasn't fulfilled. Okay, so there was another alternative answer. Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, who said in the name of Rav Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon's ruling refers to where the thief slaughtered an unblemished offering inside the temple courtyard, not for the sake of the original owner. So that makes sense. And another answer is Reish Lakish said Rabbi Shimon's ruling is where the thief slaughters a blemished offering outside the temple courtyard. So the last one does definitely make sense with Reish Lakish. It's saying the reason why he did it outside the temple courtyard is the animal actually developed a blemish. So that's exactly where he should sacrifice it. Now that we know those different answers, the Gemara is honing in on one issue with Rav Elazar. He's saying, I don't understand. Rav Elazar is saying that when the thief was going to throw the blood on the altar, it rendered the animal permitted for consumption at the very basis because the shechting was right and in the right place. And he was about to throw the blood on the altar, but he didn't. And yet it's permitted for consumption. And he says that even according to Reish Lakish's answer, it was a blemished animal that was offered outside the temple courtyard, which is correct. It was blemished. That's the right place, and it was a right shchita. And the animal was rendered permitted for consumption, even though it maybe wasn't done properly or fulfilled. So in that particular case, if it hadn't happened, why is it deemed as though it did happen? Those are the two questions he's saying. On a theory where it could have happened, how can you call it as if it happened? So Rav Dimi, so basically Rav Elazar didn't slip his mind. It was just trying to bring this case in the Gemara. So we learn a principle of Rabbi Shimon. Any blood that stands to be thrown in the future on the altar, when we say the future, we don't mean the distance, like a minute or two away in timeline, is considered as if it was already thrown. And if anything that stands to be redeemed is considered as if it was already redeemed. So if there's something that interferes with the process just before, it's considered as if it was done, and you're permitted to eat that meat. So we're a little bit shocked. And we're saying, well, where does Rabbi Shimon get it from? And the first brisa was this thing about nosar. And we're going to learn the second brisa. Does that make sense, what this nosar was bringing about? Because the whole point of this nosar thing is, if it can contract tumah, even though it's past its sell-by date when you can eat the sacrificial meat, it meant at one time it was permitted. That's why it can contract food tumah. But if you basically are slaughtering it just before sunset, where there's no time to throw in the blood, it could never have actualized. So if it could never have actualized, it never can be derived benefit. Therefore, it can never get tumah. If it can be actualized, but you just don't follow through with it because the time does allow for it, but you just never follow through, it then is susceptible to tumah because at a certain point you could render benefit from it. That's the bottom line. Okay, we're done.
I didn't think my answer was so wrong. I left out the detail, but I didn't think that what you said at the end there is what I said, isn't it? That's what I thought.
Can you just repeat that last point, please, Damon? In
Gab,
30
I will
seconds.
play it. I will play it back. But if you left out all the steps, it's the equivalent of, even if you get the right mass answer and you were a little off, it's still nobody knows how you connected the dots. What I'm
I just qualify myself. I said I'm just giving you the bottom line. But yeah, no, okay, 100%.
You know why? Because I believe that you knew what was going on exactly the way I put it across. But I can't know it unless you communicate the step-by-step process.
Yeah, I can give it to you now, but we'll start tomorrow.
All right.
Well, without the rabbis, but I can't get the rabbis' names. I get a bit lost with that. That's hard for me. Hard for all of us. We can't do what you do.
All right, guys, it was fun. It was nice to see you before load shedding. After, I know you're exhausted. And listen, there's reward for attending. I just get a lot of nachas when you follow what's going on, because once a week, when you used to do Bava Kamma, you were much more switched on, because in 45 minutes or 50 minutes, he does a daf and a half. So if you maybe try to go back to that practice once a week, it will help you prepare.
It'll be easier, yeah. especially when you're tired a lot like that.
It's up to you. It just means you'll recognize things more. So it will be just